I'm Rob Young. I'm the editor for DRGO. So, for better or worse, anything you see that comes out in writing, the mistakes are mine. I thought I'd talk about an example of what Sean's referring to in more detail, something that I think we do understand, although you'll continue to hear supposed research that claims to be able to identify these people and through widespread gun restrictions can supposedly prevent their actions. I'm talking about mass shooters. And I'm not talking about it because they are a major cause of mortality. I'm talking about it just because everyone talks about it, and I think you should know more. Some perspective. According to the FBI definition of mass shootings, there are well under an average of 100 fatalities per year in the United States. And they exclude domestic violence and family slaughters, which are crimes of passion and really don't fit into that example. So this represents less than 0.5% of all homicides, and even less than 1% of all gunshot homicides. Perpetrators can be of any age, gender, or ethnicity. However, as with most bad things in this world, they're mostly white males. However, not necessarily. Consider the DC snipers and the Naval Yard shooters. They were African American. A woman tried to shoot up a Rite Aid just on Friday before we met. In Virginia Tech, that was done by an Asian derived student. And a man named Santiago Ruiz shot up the Fort Lauderdale airport several years ago. Attacks are most often done solo, but couples have done them too. Consider the Las Vegas strip shootings a few years ago and the notorious San Bernardino Christmas party. These may happen anywhere. They're rural, urban, suburban, makes no difference, but they are typically in the attacker's home turf. Now, even exceptions to that may not be. The recent video game shooting in Jacksonville, Florida, was done by a man who bought his weapons and traveled from his home in Maryland. But he liked to go to video game competitions wherever they are, so that really makes that his turf anyway. Usually, there are going to be some hints available, at least, for people close to someone to pick up. But most of these people are loners, so that's not a reliable indicator in itself. One thing that is absolutely consistent, though, is they always pick presumably gun-free zones. Now, about the mental illness aspect of this, which people really want to believe is the cure. Only 4% of violent crime overall can really be attributed primarily to someone's mental illness. Of course, these are major mental illnesses, things like schizophrenia, particularly paranoid schizophrenia, occasionally an out-of-control bipolar episode, perhaps autism. For examples, the Aurora Theater shooter had schizophrenia. The Florida airport shooter at Fort Lauderdale did. And of course, the Newtown shooter had autism. At the same time, folks with these illnesses overall aren't aggressive, and they're far more likely to be victimized by aggressors. So that's in itself is not a clue to which one of them may act out in this way. It takes careful planning to pull off a mass shooting. There's a lot of logistics involved, getting weapons, getting ammunition, plotting the routes in and possibly out, calculating who you're going to go after, if you're after particular segments of your target population. This is just an opinion, but I think that from that point of view, the judgment and the good cognition required to plan and carry out these things, even in the presence of major mental illness, pretty much rules out the appropriateness of a defense of not guilty due to reason of insanity. These folks know what they're doing, and it's very intentional. The one thing that's very consistent about mental illness and mass shootings is that these folks, even half of them who probably have a major mental illness, are not in treatment. People in treatment are not to be afraid of. We don't know which ones are not in treatment, whom we should. Drug and alcohol use. This is not a cause of anything, but it certainly can be present in some cases, whether intoxication or withdrawal. What happens is these can disinhibit underlying tendencies. They can cause irritability, and they can diminish reality orientation. So all these can be factors, at least in triggering the event. Political, religious, philosophical beliefs, these are more subjective matters to some extent. Obviously, the biggest current problem in mass shootings is radical fundamentalist Islam. These folks believe seriously that unbelievers need to be conquered or destroyed in order for their faith to triumph. Very rarely there may be eschatological reasons. That refers to the end times, and there have been episodes where a Christian or a Jew might commit a mass murder hoping to move up the timeline for that event. Now, there are obviously political overtones to these things too. Anarchy, nihilism, these are pretty empty beliefs, of course, in tearing down and not building up, but I think they motivate some mass murders too. Consider the Oklahoma City bombing, and I think it's pretty clear, for lack of other explanation, that the Mandalay Bay shooter was very nihilistic about his life and then about other people's. Revenge seeking. This is another clear, consistent fact in these cases. Someone has a perceived hurt by a particular other person or by society. This is narcissistic injury. Narcissism is when you really are primarily self-regarding and you engage with people in order for them to make you feel better about yourself. But again, this is a trait that many, many people have. It all comes out in all of us sometimes. So just having that trait doesn't mean that you're going to end up acting out like this. Most people go to ground, hide until they feel like they can get back and start getting people to admire them again. Okay. The third leg of this is violent imagery in the media. I think this is very important. We know two things for a fact. Violent videos shown to kids and adults increase indicators of aggressive behavior shortly after they are being seen. We know a second thing. Frequent exposure to anything negative, violent, desensitizes its impact on people and makes it easier for them to do it. The clear example is suicide clusters in schools. When one student suicides, there is a likelihood of more students in their school or school district doing so shortly after, more than random. If you put these things together, the big question is, what about chronic exposure to violent media? I think that's a big issue overall, of course, in society. Consider the Newtown shooter again. You know that story. I think that increases the acceptability of aggression and violence in relating to other people. But what do we conclude from all this? None of these factors occurs with every shooter. None of them can predict that a particular individual will commit such a crime or when. So what's the moral? What do? We want to maximize deterrence and minimize casualties. Yesterday, a brave young man, Kyle Kashuv, told us his answer from his personal experience. Now you know reasons that back him up too. Harden the targets. And part of that is to be prepared to defend against attack anywhere, anytime, from anyone. Thank you.